In his lyric poem Odes, Horace writes, "As a stranger, I'll see the fierce, inhospitable Britons." This is the popular image of the Celtic inhabitants of Britain that has lingered on. Savage barbarians who were naked, blew from head to toe, and made human sacrifices. The people who only became civilized once the Romans came and conquered them. But does this image of life in Celtic Britain hold up? This is exactly the question that we're going to explore, as difficult as it may prove. Homes lie at the heart of people's lives, so this is where we will begin. The written sources are fairly sparse on the issue, but Diodorus Siculus in his Library of History states that Britons' dwellings are humble, being built for the most part out of reeds or logs. Archaeology can tell us more, however, with there being a level of continuity in the housing of ancient Britons since the Bronze Age, with people living in the roundhouse. We know these dwellings were common because of the impressions left behind, like post holes and ditches. These have been unearthed in archaeological digs, like on the National Highway dig in Tepsford, central Bedfordshire. 3 roundhouses were uncovered, roughly dating from 300 BCE to 100 BCE. Alongside the usual post holes and ditches, amazingly, a piece of original wattle and daub wall survived, which helps us further to know what these roundhouses could have been made of. Roundhouses were made from a wooden frame. Walls were then made using the wattle and daub technique, where flexible sticks and reeds were woven together in panels, then covered in a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal excrement. The roofs were then made from thatch and rushes, thickly packed together for insulation. It would not have covered the whole of the roof because it's believed that there was a smoke hole in the centre to stop people from being smoked out. We have evidence that roundhouses were used all over the country, with ditches and post holes being found in eastern Anglesey in Wales and Northumbria in England. In Scotland, a form of roundhouses were arguably used in the shape of crannogs. They were effectively roundhouses that were built on stilts in watery areas. An amazing reconstruction is visible in Loch Tay in the Scottish Crannog Centre. It is also apparent that people of all statuses would have used the roundhouse, even the elites. Digs have unearthed large roundhouses, for example. In the Yeavering Bell site in Northumberland, a 130-metre roundhouse was unearthed. It may have been used for defensive purposes, but it still highlights that the Celts still lived in the same roundhouse structures, they just varied in size depending on wealth and status. Another key part of everyday life in any society, ancient or modern, is food. Julius Caesar suggests in his text The Gallic Wars that Britons had a very limited diet that to him suggested their barbarity. Most of the inland inhabitants do not sow corn, but live on milk and flesh. However, this was far from the case, as Britons had a varied diet. High levels of cereal grain like barley, wheat and rye were grown, and eaten in breads or porridges, as analysis from cooking pots show. Oats were also grown, but were more likely used for animal feed. We know that grain constituted a large part of people's lives due to the grain stores that have been found. For example, the brochs of Scotland, which date from this period. They are large circular stone structures that are believed to be used as granaries. Celtic Britons also ate vegetables. Although it's hard to exactly know what vegetables they had pre-Roman invasion, we know they had cabbages, wild garlic, a form of turnips, and legumes like broad beans, which were also interestingly nicknamed Celtic beans. They also could flavour their food with a variety of wild berries, wild herbs, and honey. Olive oil was also imported in the late Iron Age thanks to trade links with Rome, which I will discuss later. Drinks-wise, people obviously would have drunk water alongside alcoholic drinks like ale brewed using barley, mead that was made using honey. Wine could also be imported from hotter climates, but it was usually reserved for the elites who could afford it. Research into isotopes from teeth from Iron Age burials also suggests that Britons ate a high-protein diet from domesticated farm animals such as cows, sheep, and goats, and occasionally pigs opposed to game that was hunted. This protein might have not just come from meat, it could have come from other animal produce like milk and cheese. It seems that fish consumption, interestingly, was less common, but analysis of an elderly woman from Orkney suggests that she ate fish throughout her life. This highlights how, above all, diets varied regionally. Another intriguing question about the Celts is what exactly did they wear and what did they look like? The written sources offer us very conflicting information about Britons' clothing. Caesar says that the Celts wear their hair long and clothe themselves in skins of the animals that they eat, whilst other writers such as Herodian say they are practically naked and do not mind the mud because they are unfamiliar with the use of clothing, and they adorn their waists and necks with iron. We know indeed that the Celts did wear clothes, contrary to the opinion of Herodian, because evidence survived of cloth making, such as loom weights made from baked clay, needles and weaving combs made for antlers. These would have been used to push the fabrics on looms. The Celts likely wore clothes made out of wool, linen, or animal skin. These were likely in the form of tunics, the length depending on the gender of the wearer, as is typical in most ancient societies. Masculine people typically would have worn short tunics and trousers, and feminine people would have worn longer tunics. Everyone would have worn cloaks, however, for protection against the climate. These clothes certainly would not have been drab, they would have been brightly dyed with natural materials, like madder to produce red and woad to produce blue. Clothes would have likely been clasped using belts and brooches, some of which still survive. Shoes would have been worn too, likely soft-soled and made out of leather. Amazingly, a shoe was unearthed in Somerset in 2005. Celts would have not had plain appearances. They would have decorated themselves with jewellery, rings, bracelets, and torques. Circular rigid neck pieces are most associated with Iron Age Britons. The metal used for jewellery, of course, would have depended on the status of the wearer, with gold and silver reserved for the elites, with common farmers more likely to use iron or bronze. No matter a person's status, however, they certainly would have wanted to adorn themselves. Britain was not isolated from the world, as hard as this is to believe. Britain had an expansive trading network which gave people, often the elites, the ability to import luxuries to use in their everyday lives, as well as to tap into new streams of wealth. This happened as early as the writings of Herodotus, who could have alluded to Britain. His mentions of the Cassiodorites, which roughly translates to the Tin Isles, where, as he states, our tin is bought from. Whilst this could have not definitively been Britain, it tells us that potentially, as early as the 430s, Britain could have been trading with people as far off as Greece. It also tells us what lies at the heart of this trade: Britain's unique deposits of precious metal, particularly tin, which was rich in Cornwall and Wales, which granted wealth to the peoples of Britain. The Greek geographer Strabo expands further. It bears grain, cattle, gold, silver and iron. These things accordingly are exported from the island. Dogs were also popular exports who were suited to the purposes of the chase. This enabled the Celts to acquire luxuries and import goods such as olive oil, wine, jewellery, glass and pottery. For example, Italian wine amphoras were found in burials north of the Thames in the 1st century BCE, like this one, excavated in Hertfordshire. Famous goods like the Battersea shield and the metal fittings found in the grave of the Wetwang woman also were decorated with Mediterranean coral that was imported. However, this trade and the wealth it brought Celtic society also had a darker and despicable side. Strabo also lists slaves amongst Britain's exports. Undoubtedly, the labour which allowed excess production to happen so regularly was also provided by enslaved people. No matter the wealth and trade Britain had, it cannot be denied that it was founded off the backs of people who lived miserable lives. Finally, we can look to the social structure of Celtic Britain to learn more about Britons' everyday lives. As I have discussed in my previous video, Britain was a country comprised of smaller local communities or tribes who were ruled over by an elite. The next subdivision of society beneath the elites were warriors. Celt society was imbued with war. It permeated every aspect of life, so those who could fight well would logically be prized in society. We know warriors were a key part of Celtic society due to grave sites where people were buried alongside their weapons and armour, such as one in West Sussex where a helmet was unearthed. We also know of warriors' importance due to their presence in Celtic religion, as many war deities were worshipped, like Morrigan and Net. Talking of religion, probably equal to warriors were the class of priests, seers, sorcerers, and druids who led religious practices and who gave counsel and prophecy to those who needed it, including the ruling elite, who often did not make decisions without consulting druids. This shows their importance in a society where religion was the way in which people interacted with the world. Poets and bards were also part of this class, providing a key source of entertainment and identity in the Celtic world. Below this class was skilled craft people, such as blacksmiths, carpenters, and leatherworkers. Evidence survives of this, for example, the Stanwick horse mask, which acted as a decoration, possibly for a bucket. Celtic Britain was a pre-industrial society, meaning that agriculture was vital to people's ability to eat and make an income. Because of this, the majority of Britain's population would have been farmers. The type of farming would have depended on the area. Farmers would have used iron ploughs called ards, which would have likely been attached to horses or oxen. These types of ploughs only scratched the surface, meaning fields would have had to be ploughed twice. Farming was a hard and meagre job. At the bottom of Celtic society was the underclass of slaves, who grimly were sold and owned as property. This is evident from the slave shackles that still survive. For example, these irons that were found at Big Brew Camp in Canterbury. Slavery was a hereditary position. If you were born a slave, you likely remained one until you died. However, a person could become a slave if they were captured in warfare, or sold by themselves or their parents to pay off a debt. As advanced as the Celts were in many ways, it cannot be denied that their trading of people lives up to their barbaric image. It seems that the Celts took a far more egalitarian approach to society, however, than many other contemporary societies did. Of course, they were not a utopia. However, as Cassius states, their form of rule is democratic for the most part, which could suggest that there was an element of communal decision-making. It seems that women also experienced a better position in Celtic society than in other societies of the time. There is evidence that women could be chieftains and rulers in their own right. Women likely also could hold religious positions, because there is no evidence to suggest otherwise. I would say it is more likely than not, because of the importance of female deities in the Celtic pantheon like Morrigan, Brigid, and Dani. Women could also be part of the warrior class I mentioned earlier, with graves surviving with biological women buried with goods of warriors. However, the role of women in Celtic society is a very complex issue, deserving of a whole video in its own right. On a microscopic level, it is harder to explore how families and marriages functioned. Julius Caesar writes that groups of 10 and 12 men have wives together in common, and particularly brothers along with brothers and fathers with sons, but the children born out of these unions are reckoned to belong to the particular house to which the maiden was first conducted. This suggests that some Celts practiced polygamy, passing women around like objects. However, this must be viewed with skepticism, as Caesar was writing how he interpreted Celtic society. Many gain their information instead on Celtic marriages based on later law codes like the Brehon Law, which date to the early medieval period. These laws suggest that marriages were monogamous, with a dowry given to women to ensure their financial security. It also seems that divorce was possible based on these laws. However, these laws were written and codified when Britons had been Christianized, which make them particularly troublesome in telling us about Iron Age Celtic people. In many ways, Celtic society goes against its barbaric image that the Romans created. Not only did the Britons have a rich culture and varied diet, they also afforded people greater freedoms than even in the 19th century, with women having a visible position in Celtic society. However, we must not romanticize the Celtic Age, which was a hierarchical society founded on war, blood, and slavery. Hi there! Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing. I also have a TikTok and an Instagram which I will leave linked down below so you can check them out if you want any more content about history. Also, if you have any requests for future videos, then please make sure to pop them in the comments below. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. I have been Our Historia, and until next time.